Dear planet, I understand that we have not always treated you with respect, but in order to stay alive, we have to make sacrifices to enable the development of our country and ensure survival of our population before being able to care about the very important matter of climate change. The idea of an ideal human is a major issue in today's society. We have a tendency to disseminate notions of how people should live and think, but we do it with cell phones powered by child labor. We can also easily demand of China to reduce its consumption, but there are few policies and laws in place to address labor condition or societal issues such as the Uyghurs' atrocities. The Maslow pyramid argues that once the basic needs are met, we may consider what's next and then live in accordance with that ideal that we should all reach. We have not yet implemented coercive methods on global and communal objectives when faced with severe challenges such as starvation, migration, and so on. It's lovely to hold conferences in Paris, but in Europe, the Industrial Revolution began in the 19th century. Before they cared about the planet's vulnerability and all the things they're coming up with today, they've polluted it to assure their economic progress, and they succeeded their process. Developing countries are undergoing an industrial and economic development boom, and they will be enabled to apply what you demand while also developing themselves. The transition is gradual. First, you go through a saturation period that satisfies the citizens' need and appetite for change because it becomes unlivable for them owing to a decline in the quality of life before returning to the idea of regulation. But you must have the means. Is there anyone to use a bicycle or a car for a long distance? It's not anyone who can afford improvements such as a hybrid vehicle or a Tesla, which only the wealthier can afford. Being environmental friendly is a luxury.
The United Nations defines climate change as long-term shift in temperature and weather patterns. This shift may be natural, but since the 1800s, human activities have been the main driver of climate change. As we know, climate change is no more a future problem. However, it's not the biggest issue facing developing countries at the moment. The reason behind this is due to many factors. First, most of the LDCs are agriculture-dependent countries, unlike the industrialized world, which explains that 80% of the emissions are generated by the industrialized world, and poor countries have had to accept the consequences of this. So it is the moral responsibility of industrialized countries to take the lead in dealing with the danger of climate change. Second, many rich countries, while they were growing, they didn't internalize the risks and the potential cost of climate change. Let's take the example of world wars. Finally, adaptation, or what we call inclusive green growth, is the solution that is proposed to LDCs. Yet we have to take into consideration that there is an adaptation gap, which is a big obstacle to this solution. As a matter of fact, adopting this new way of development is so costly and difficult.
Education and health are two components that need to be taken into consideration by the government. The benefits of a good education can be seen at the individual level. High education leads to more employment opportunities, but also at the aggregate level. For instance, a stable economy. GDP growth is the best way to decrease poverty. In this graph, we can see a correlation between GDP growth and the number of years of education you have. However, this only explains 25% of GDP growth. In order to have a good education, we need to ensure a good quantity and quality of it, which is not the case in developing countries according to the Canadian government. In developing countries, they have underqualified teachers, overfilled schools, and distance schools. All of that translates into a low level of education for children. An example that can illustrate that is Brazil. In the book The Challenges of Education in Brazil by Simon Schwarzman, he shows that the teachers are not capable of teaching, affecting the test scores of the students. Focusing on health is also vital to ensure the development of a country. A health poverty trap occurs because poverty causes health issues and health issues causes poverty. At the end, the individual is stuck in a vicious circle.
Our time will be remembered by many events. However, I think the cause of a lot of them will be due to the water stress level our planet is about to experience. Though this issue arises from climate change related problem, it's become an immediate issue that needs direct attention. To provide a broader understanding of what water scarcity is, let us define it as water scarcity, which can be broadly understood as the lack of access to adequate quantities of water for human and environmental use. There are two main issues that we will bring to your attention today. First off, we can see that already back in 2001, researchers were worried about large wave of migration from countries where water stress are at its highest, such as India, Kuwait, or even Libya. Secondly, access to clean water. Though water scarcity explains why population lack access to water, it's not the only reason. Countries like the DRC, who possesses an abundant amount of fresh water, still have 51 million people without access to clean water. That's 76% of the population. Clean water is another threat, and that needs to be dealt with in priority. Every year, 6% of people in low-income countries die from lack of clean water. That's 1.2 million people annually. Furthermore, we know water scarcity leads to agricultural problems that in time lead to conflict, especially in parts of Africa and Asia. We can take, for example, the Arab Springs, which I believe underline the gravity of the situation.
To conclude, the improvement of our society should meet current requirements without compromising future generations' ability to meet their own. Developing countries should concentrate on reducing poverty and addressing more critical challenges such as basic services access. They should begin by focusing on their priorities by developing a sustainable strategy to address some of the world's most important challenges such as income disparity, human rights issues, fair working conditions, racial injustice, gender inequality, and unequal distribution of resources.